Greetings everyone, and welcome back to my channel. The name of this video is Where is all the historical information about people of color? Before I get started, please do me a favor by subscribing to my channel and clicking on the notification bell. That way you will get notified whenever I launch a new video. Alright, so I'm going off the beaten path a little bit with this video, but I thought it was important to let you know why it's so difficult to find information on people of color in history, or any history that doesn't follow the approved narrative. As a side note, you will notice that I chose to use the term people of color in the title of this video versus black people because, for one thing, no one is the color black, and there are so many negative connotations connected to that term. Also, not all people of color are from Africa. That is a fact. I have nothing against the continent, but evidence shows that people of color hail from all the continents. Other facts is that the majority of people on this earth are people of color. This is well known to many historical scholars and explorers, including Benjamin Franklin, someone who has been held up in American history as one of our de facto founding fathers. Alright, so before I get too deep into this video, I want to throw out a quote at you. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. This is a quote from a fictional book written by George Orwell called 1984. This quote is going to make a lot of sense to you as we go through this video. Alright, so let me get back to the original subject of this video. Where is all the historical information about people of color? Alright, so the number one issue I want to emphasize is who controls, owns, and possesses the vital information in the United States. When I say the word information, I'm referring to things like historical writings, military rolls, paintings, books, personal journals, photographs, historical artifacts, audio recordings, historic newspapers, statues, and sculptures/figurines. I also don't want to leave out current information that is collected and stored on a daily basis. This information, which includes current events, official documents, both public and confidential. Alright, so next I want to cover where is this information generally physically located? And those places might be the U.S. National Archives, museums, libraries, historical societies, and private collections. All right, so let me talk a little bit about what some of these entities are and what they're responsible for. First off, let me talk about the U.S. National Archives. So Congress established the National Archives in 1934 to preserve and care for the records of the U.S. government. Previously, federal records were kept in various basements, attics, abandoned buildings, and other storage places with little security or concerns for storage conditions. In 1935, archive staff and WPA workers began to survey federal records, and the next year the first batch of federal records were transferred to the new National Archives building in Washington, D.C., from one building on Pennsylvania Avenue. The National Archives now has over 40 facilities nationwide, including field archives, federal record centers, presidential libraries, the Office of Federal Registrar, the National Historic Publications and Records Commission, the Information Security Oversight Office, the National Declassification Center, and the Office of Government Information Services. All right, so next I want to talk about museums and libraries. There are hundreds of museums across the United States. They display all sorts of items. Some they own, and many items that are on loan to the museum. Several of the more well-known are Metropolitan Museum of Art, Museum of Modern Art, National Museum of Natural History, National Portrait Gallery, Smithsonian American Art Museum, Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, American Museum of Natural History, New York Historical Society, Brooklyn Historical Society, Getty Museum, the Huntington Library, National History Museum of Los Angeles, and Legion of Honor Museum. All right, so there are numerous museums in every one of the 50 states. Way too many to list. However, the one thing they all have in common is only a small percentage of them are controlled by curators of color. For those of you that are unsure what a curator does, they manage and oversee a collection of objects, most commonly in a cultural institution like a museum, library, gallery, or archive. And that definition comes from the museum.jobs website. As the title of the website suggests, they are in business of hiring people to work at the various museums. There was a sentence on the site that caught my attention regarding curators. And that sentence goes on to say, we like to think of this person as the keeper/storyteller of our world's most important historical and cultural objects and narratives. I hope you all can start to see where I'm going with this. And also, that small percentage of curators that I mentioned is a very recent thing. I feel confident in saying that between circa 1870 to circa 1980, there were no people of color in executive positions or board positions in any museum. You can see a graph here from the website Association of Art Museum Directors. This survey was conducted by them in 2018. And as you can see, the title says Intellectual Leadership Positions by Race and Ethnicity. And you can also see the titles over the bar graphs. First one is Conservation, second one Curators, then Education, and then Museum Leadership. If you look there at the bottom of the graph, you'll see POC, which is a dark green, and that stands for people of color. And then you'll see the lighter green, which stands for people that are white. And it's also showing you a comparison between 2015 to 2018. You can clearly see here that white people dominate this whole profession. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next type of institution, which is the historical societies. So what is a historical society? According to dictionary.archivist.org, it is an organization that seeks to preserve and promote interests in the history of a region, a period, or a subject. The site also states that historical societies are typically focused on a state or community. They often have collections of artifacts, books, and records, and may include a museum. Some state historical societies, such as Minnesota, are quasi-governmental institutions organized as a private corporation but maintaining the official state archives. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last entity, and those are private collections. So what are private collections? Well, as the name suggests, they are collections of items that are held by individuals, families, or groups. Basically, anything can be collected. Many of the items I already mentioned earlier in the video. They again would be typical items such as paintings, books, writings, historical documents, sculptures, etc. But there are also collections of ancient American artifacts like arrowheads, pottery, weapons, statues, dolls, dinosaur bones, religious artifacts. I could really go on with the items that people collect because the list is endless. So according to the Chikora Foundation Incorporated at chikora.org, and they remarked that collecting artifacts can be a controversial topic, and with good reason. Many collectors are looting our heritage. They are stealing from us all, converting what belongs to all of us into their own private caches. But there are others who are working equally hard to ensure that they are collecting not only legally, but also ethically. Some of the other things they say about private collectors on their site is that careful collectors will also record information and preserve collections from sites that are being destroyed, ensuring that at least some of the information the site contains is preserved by providing information about that site and its locations to the professional community. These collectors are helping future generations learn about their past. Then it goes on to say, but unfortunately, there are also unscrupulous collectors, individuals whose only interests are in the actual possession of the artifact. They aren't interested in recording information about the site or sharing information with professional archaeologists. They are only interested in what an artifact is worth, or how unique it is, or what they can trade for it. You see, these collectors are buying and selling on websites such as eBay all the time. Often they will destroy archaeological sites looking for the perfect relic. All right, so I gave you all that information because I want you to realize who controls, owns, and possesses just about all of the information that historians use to tell the history of the United States and the world for that matter. This topic is vast. I'm really only touching the surface. I could take it in so many relevant directions, but that would take a series of videos. All right, so let me drop another quote on you. And it goes, whoever controls the media controls the mind. And that's by Jim Morrison. So let me ask you a question. Knowing what I just told you about how all the nation's federal historical information was stored prior to 1935, how it was kept in various basements, attics, and abandoned buildings, and other storage places with little security or concern for storage conditions, do you think there was any room for mismanagement of records? Do you think whoever was in charge of collecting and organizing these records chose the information that they felt was most relevant? Do you think there was any bias involved in the process? Remember, during the Woodrow Wilson presidential administration, he segregated the federal government, fired all the high-ranking people of color from federal positions. He ensured that people of color would be hired for only menial jobs by hiring department directors that agreed with his Southern segregationist priorities. He also paid people of color less than white people in those low-level positions. The segregationist era lasted from 1900 to 1939. I'll ask you again, do you think there was any bias and bigotry involved in collecting those federal records from the basements, attics, and abandoned buildings? In my opinion, yes. I honestly don't think people know that there have been thousands of original historical documents stolen from the archives over the years. If you Google thefts from the National Archives, you will see who has been stealing the information and how long it's been allowed to continue. In 2011, a man named Thomas Lowry, a psychiatrist and longtime NARA researcher, confessed to altering Abraham Lincoln's presidential pardon of Patrick Murphy, a Civil War soldier. Lowry brought a fountain pen into the National Archives research room. Using fade-proof pigment-based ink, he altered the date of the Murphy pardon in order to change the historical significance. Now ask yourself, who else altered records that didn't get caught? The first thefts the archives admits to happened in 1963, and the last theft that occurred was in 2018. These thefts that can be researched are the ones that the government admits to. Who knows how many more occurred that they are too embarrassed to admit? I'm sure the thefts and alterations didn't just start happening in 1962. I'm sure they happened between 1940 and 1961 as well. Unfortunately, we will never know because those administrators and workers are all dead now. Alright, so if you have seen some of my prior videos, you will see a basic theme that I assert, which is history has been whitewashed. The historical information has been skewed, appropriated, and rewritten in favor of non-melanated people, aka white people. The sad truth is that most people, at least in the so-called Western world, believe that white people are responsible for anything remotely significant in history. This belief is shared by most people, whether they are melanated or not. It has been ingrained in our minds via our educational systems. And also general lies have been told and retold enough times that it seems like the truth. We can see this clearly via the Southern Lost Cause narrative created after the Civil War. This narrative was championed by the Wilson administration in the first half of the 20th century. We can even see it today via the former Trump presidential administration. They fraudulently claimed that the 2020 election was stolen, that there was widespread election fraud, and that the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6, 2021 was not really an insurrection, but more of a peaceful demonstration, and that any violence that did occur was Antifa. Had Trump and his followers been successful in stopping the transfer of power and thereby installing Donald Trump as a president for another term, we would have seen the end of American democracy as we know it. Trump, towards the end of his administration, tried to take a page out of the Wilson administration handbook by creating the Patriotic Education Commission. Trump and his flock are scared of the rising tide of citizens highlighting and pushing back against the systematic racism that continues to wreak havoc for people of color in the United States. According to an NPR article dated September 17, 2020, Trump is quoted as saying, "Critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and the crusade against American history is toxic propaganda. Ideological poison that, if not removed, will dissolve the civic bonds that tie us together. It will destroy our country." Now, see how he states, if not removed, meaning that they have no problem removing information, as they did in the past. In my opinion, a so-called free nation would denounce the information as false, but not destroy it. In a free nation, one should be able to study alternate theories and be able to make up their own mind what they want to believe. Honestly, this is why I wanted to create this video, to show how the belief that people of color were not responsible for anything notable in history was propagated and continues to be taught. When I take a look at many of the historical books that were created since the early 20th century, they are whitewashed not only by glorifying and changing people of color of significance into non-melanated people, but it's what's not in the books. It's the exclusion of truthful information from these books and other historical references. It's also the exclusion of melanated people that made an exhaustive list of significant accomplishments to not only the United States, but the rest of the world throughout history. Not only that, the history books exclude how and why the United States was created, what was done to subdue the Aboriginal population, how and why melanated people, aka Black people, were demonized, subjugated, and marginalized. What events took place that stripped melanated people of the land and wealth, whether they were indigenous to the Americas or from Europe, the Caribbean, or the continent of Africa? Ask yourself, why is this information not prominently displayed for all to see? All of the killing, terrorism, and treachery that occurred in order for white people to finagle their way into holding all of the power and the money. This is why many white people don't want to teach critical race theory, because it will lay bare all of the things that were done to gain and maintain a hold on power. Their children will learn what their lineage did to attain dominance and control. Many people are horrified to learn of the atrocities that were committed on the German Ashkenazi Jews in the last century. Their descendants had to create museums and curriculum so as to never forget. Their history is often denied to this day, not because it didn't happen, but because it did happen, and because it showed the horrific things human beings can do to one another for fraudulent and fabricated reasons. Well, this, in my opinion, is why we today don't read and study about the hundreds of massacres that were committed on Aboriginal Americans and Native American people in order to take their lands. We don't study the hundreds of white mobs that burned down and decimated numerous and prosperous Black towns. There is no studying of the flooding of numerous Black towns that I just recently watched information on in a video done by the Ruffin show on YouTube. You guys should really check that out. I'll link it in the description area. Please realize I am also not ignorant of the fact that melanated Europeans, aka Black Europeans, as well as competing, greedy, and manipulated Aboriginal American tribes contributed significantly to the servitude, removal, and killing of many fellow Aboriginal Americans. In my opinion, non-melanated people, aka a large group of white people, after the Civil War, ramped up the white supremacist movement, reclassifying all melanated people into one group, Negro or colored, even those families with European lineage that had white status, totally removing them from literary history. I cannot mention this enough. This action of appropriating history was further reinforced and carried out by Woodrow Wilson in his 8 years at the helm of the United States as the Commander-in-Chief. I really hope you've seen my video called Prominent Americans You Assumed Were White. If you haven't, please check it out because it's going to explain a lot. All right, so you may be wondering to yourself, okay, so you told us about how this information was hidden and disseminated in the United States, but what about the rest of the world? Why do other countries also subscribe to this plan? Well, think about it. Whites in those countries have a lot to gain: power, wealth, privilege. If they don't acknowledge who was who in history, they will never have to face any questions or consequences. They also will not have to pay reparations for the suffering, lives, money, land, and heritage that was stolen. An example of this can be seen well after World War II. According to an article in the Minnesota Council of Churches website, mnchurches.org, German Ashkenazi Jews in the 1950s started to receive payments which continue to this day. The article stated that some 400,000 Jews who survived the Nazis were still alive in 2019. That year, Germany paid $564 million to the Claims Conference, which handles the payments. In Germany, the reparations program is called Wiedergutmachung, which literally means making the good again, according to the 2006 book, The Handbook of Reparations. In Israel, it's simply called Shilayim, the payments. I'm sorry if I butchered that. The book called Germany's effort the largest, most comprehensive reparations program ever implemented. There is also an article from the Washington Post dated June 12, 1988, titled Daimler-Benz Agrees to Pay for War Labor. The company Daimler-Benz AG, manufacturer of the Mercedes automobiles, on June 11, 1988, agreed to pay $11.8 million in reparations to victims of its use of forced labor during the Nazi era. Daimler-Benz joined several other Western German companies that have granted compensation for work done for them during World War II by war prisoners, concentration camp inmates, and others who had been seized by the Nazis. Can you imagine what the United States and many European countries would owe in reparations if they admitted to the cover-up and complete theft they have committed on people of color? Germany has paid billions in reparations to the Jews for killing them, stealing their possessions, and displacing them from their homes, amongst other atrocities. They had to endure these acts of evil from 1933 to 1945. All right, so let me tell you how, in my opinion, the United States indoctrinated the rest of the world regarding people of color and gave them the blueprint for rewriting their own history. I read a research paper written by Joan Collette, a regional librarian with the United States Information Agency. The paper is titled American Libraries Abroad, United States Information Agency Activities. All right, so that paper goes on to read, at the end of World War II, when the U.S. Department of State assumed responsibility for United States informational and cultural programming abroad, several types of libraries were included. Notice the title of the department included the words cultural programming abroad. The paper goes on to state that 4 of these libraries had already been set up in Buenos Aires in 1928, Mexico City in 1941, and by 1945 there were 38 such libraries. Right, and then in 1943 and 1946, several libraries were set up in major cities in the British Commonwealth. And just as a side note, the Commonwealth of Nations, or the British Commonwealth, is a voluntary association of 54 sovereign states, known as the British Commonwealth. The original members were the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Irish Free State, and Newfoundland. All right, so this paper further goes on to state that these were not lending libraries for casual readers. They had a clearly defined role and were designed to service writers, the press, radio, American missions, local government agencies, and educational, scientific, and cultural institutions and organizations. These libraries were small, highly selective libraries containing reference material produced in the United States, providing information which can best reach the masses of people in an allied country through the media of the press, the radio, and educational institutions. The paper goes further on to say that after 1945, the American military government of the United States Army opened up a 4th kind of library in occupied areas of the world. These libraries were called information centers. These information centers attempted to supply, as a representative, a collection of significant United States publications in the fields of knowledge as may be secured under budgetary limitations, and provided a wide range of community programming. Again, as a side note, I hope you heard the word community programming, because that is consistent in this paper, this research paper, and it's what was going on in these communities. They were programming the community. All right, so moving on, all 4 types of libraries were placed under the Department of State by Public Law 402, known as the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which was designed to promote the better understanding of the United States and other countries, and to increase mutual understanding between the people of the United States and the people of other countries. So, in my opinion, what the United States did was provide its own programming so that other countries' perception of us was what we wanted it to be, and not necessarily the truth. All right, so reading further into this paper, in 1953, the United States Information Agency was established. There were 196 information centers and reading rooms in 53 countries, as well as 54 binational centers, the majority in Latin America, for a total of 230 centers in 75 countries. The number has grown a lot larger since then. Okay, so there's a lot more information given in this paper, but I just wanted to give you a sample. Again, in my opinion, I thought it showed perfectly how the United States exported its rewritten history to the world. Did you catch all the times it mentioned cultural programming, and that the libraries were not for casual readers, but specifically for media and government agencies? I'm sure other countries figured, well, if they're going to go this route, why shouldn't we? There is everything to gain. All right, so I've touched on a lot of information here. Here's my big point. People of color have not been a part of the collecting, preserving, and presenting historical information after the white supremacist movement kicked into high gear at the end of the 1800s. All this hiding of information has one purpose: That is to continue to keep all of the society ignorant and keep white people in power. These lies have been taught for so long that most people believe them. Even when they're shown true facts and evidence, their indoctrination is so deep, and I'm referring to both people of color and non-people of color, aka white people, that comprehending the information is almost impossible. The interesting part of this issue is that many historical documents and artifacts that disprove the current false historical narrative are still inside these institutions. I'm sure quite a bit of it has been destroyed or altered, but as I'm pointing out to you, people of color do not have access to these institutions. There's this great video on YouTube that speaks to this blocking people of color from accessing information. It was produced by Vox, VOX, and it's titled When White Supremacists Overthrew the Government. The subject of the video is about the city of Wilmington, North Carolina. Several of the people interviewed in the video stated that when they went to the library and inquired about the year 1898, the librarian refused to show them any information. They were also told that there was information, but it was kept under lock and key. Mind you, that public libraries are paid for with public tax dollars, so everybody should have access to whatever is in that library. All right, so I'm going to link that video down in the information section. Please do yourself a favor and watch this video. It's not very long, but it's very informative. I have to say that the only issue I had with this video was when the narrator states that Wilmington, North Carolina, under the control of people of color, was a rarity, and what happened to them in that city was uncommon. This is total BS. This is exactly how white people took control of the United States. What happened to Wilmington happened all over the United States. This is also what is being hidden and lied about by the government. There is an excellent quote that speaks to this phenomenon. I believe I used it in the previous video, and it says, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." Now, this quote is often attributed to Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. However, there is no proof of that. As I mentioned before, this is the same tactic Trump and his administration are using today, which means history is repeating itself, and not in an innocent way, but as a strategic effort. If Republicans in power positions continue to tell the lie that the election was a fraud and that Biden did not legitimately win the election, people will eventually question the truth and then start to believe the lie. The sad truth is, Donald Trump has lied so often that it seems normal. People that believe in him don't care that he is lying because they believe in his autocratic movement. As my wife often says, people are just looking for a permission slip to act badly. In other words, they are waiting for someone to say it's okay for them to feel like they do. Another sad fact is that many Republican officials have admitted in private that they know Trump is lying, but they don't care because they get to hold on to power. Just like those Republicans, there are people that know the truth about the real history of the United States and Europe, but they would rather hold on to power and keep the lie going. This entire Trump era makes my point. This ruse is not new. This tactic has been used successfully in the United States and around the Western world to keep white people in power. I hope you can see what lengths these people will go to in order to keep that power. They have lied and will continue to lie, cheat, and steal. They have had over 100 years to hide, destroy, alter, and indoctrinate all of us. I'm sure you can imagine the sheer turmoil and upheaval that would occur if the truth came out. I mean, look at what the mostly white insurrectionists did to the Capitol on January 6, 2021, based off one man's lies. Can you imagine what they would do if they tried to wrap their heads around the biggest lie ever? Total chaos. Major white fragility. This is another reason critical race theory is being fought so vigorously. White supremacists and those that back them know if you are taught to think critically, you may start to ask questions. You may stop just believing what you are told, but demand proof, and when you get that proof, confirm that it makes sense. We are living the biggest lie as I am speaking to you. I really hope we as a people, and I mean no matter what your skin color, can wake up and realize what has happened in the past and what we need to do to correct the present and the future.